Welcome to Beyond the Bottom Line with
Anna Letitia Cook.
Hello and welcome to Beyond the Bottom Line. It's a great pleasure today to welcome Alice Beveridge. She's a psychologist, a former primary teacher, and works in the field of applied positive psychology. She's also the director of a really cutting-edge motivation and personal development organisation called Tree of Knowledge, which I love the name. And I know it's your second time to come and be interviewed by us, Alice, so I really appreciate you coming. And today, because I know you work very much with organisations and individuals and helping them to really recognise the aspects of their life that have most meaning, I'm interested in talking to you about developing holistic leaders, because I think it's important to go beyond the bottom line and to enjoy all of aspects of our life. Anyway, I've got carried away with the introduction, so welcome to the show, Alice.
Well, thank you so much for having me back. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Great. So can I start with a couple of questions? I know you're a specialist in leadership development and particularly in the application of positive psychology. So can you explain a bit more about really what positive psychology is, how it can be applied, and what it means practically?
Yeah, of course. So positive psychology is one of the newer sort of eras of psychology in many ways. When I first studied my undergraduate degree in psychology many moons ago now, it was interesting, and it was really I kind of thought I'd probably go into the clinical field because that's where lots of people went. But I quite quickly discovered that in that field, yes, you're working with lots of people who need support, but about 80% of psychologists are within that field.
Yep.
So I found myself thinking, right, 80% of people are working in this field. Approximately 23% of people fall into a clinical box. What about the other 77%? Is there a field within psychology that really helps tap into that? And over the years, and as you said earlier, I was a primary school teacher. I intended to become an educational psychologist. I got very lost along the way, but it's been a happy diversion, I would say. And I discovered the world of positive psychology, which really fundamentally is the psychology of the other 77%.
Yeah.
It focuses on well-being, resilience, mindset. It looks at how we build these capacities in people. Yeah. And it's really focusing on how we become like the best version of ourselves. But it goes beyond that selfish element of that. So it's not just about being the best in the world at something. It's much more about being the best for the world. And the researchers in this area have spent a lot of time trying to tease apart some quite challenging concepts and constructs that we have. Things like happiness, for example. Like, if we look at happiness, how do you even start to unpick what that means? The great philosophers, your Aristotles, your Platos have tried to wrestle with this. And over the years, different types of happiness have emerged out of the world of positive psychology. And the ones that I'm particularly interested in are the ones that look at our subjective well-being. So that is like how we actually feel day to day.
Yeah.
Okay, so like how generally satisfied we are with our lives, how much meaning we derive from things. And I'm also really interested in that meaningful side of it. So how do we attribute meaning in our life? How do we build meaning? How do we use our passions and our character strengths to really derive as much meaning as possible?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where positive psychology sits in the realm of psychology. But what I particularly love about it is it's a very easy to apply field.
Yep.
No, it's not like many areas of psychology where you're either looking at a diagnostic manual in something like clinical psychology and you're going through a very clinical process in order to diagnose a disorder or an impairment of some type. It's much more about what are the things that we can do in practice that actually improve our lives, our team's lives, our organizations, how we run our businesses, and how we care for ourselves within that. So within positive psychology, we really focus on what's known as positive psychology interventions.
Right.
I always think of it as PPIs, but for the personality, you know, and instead of the PPI claims that were all over the TV when it came to insurance years ago, it's about positive psychology interventions. And most of them are really simple, you know, really small things that we can do that just improve our well-being day to day.
Yeah. So with all of that, because you're very much leadership and things like that, it must be quite a new idea for a lot of corporate. I mean, like corporate well-being and holistic leadership and all of that, which obviously positive psychology is very much in that line. So what would you say the current vision is in the corporate world regarding all of that? Has it changed recently? Are they open to it, or do they have a complete freak out and panic as soon as they hear anything about it?
You know, I think as horrendous as the pandemic has been in many ways, one thing it has forced, I think, and this is something that I think was already coming, but one thing it has absolutely accelerated is this idea of holistic leadership. Yeah. So the businesses that I've been working with over the last 18 months, like every business, has had to pivot or pirouette. You know, some of us have done dance moves we didn't know even existed before the pandemic, if I'm honest with you, our own business included. Yeah. But one of the real sort of driving forces behind every business has been, how do we make sure that our people are well? Yep. Now, there's been this massive focus on well-being. Yeah. And obviously, as we went through lockdowns and things, there was lots of organisations either using the furlough scheme to allow a bit more flexibility for people to be able to care for children or homeschool, or to be able just to sustain their business over that period of time. But particularly in the corporate world, as I say, I think this was coming. You know, there was a change happening before the pandemic where people kind of realised, you know, there's more to life than working every hour of the day. There's more to life than turnover. There's more to life than the bottom line. Yeah. And actually people are much more productive when they're happy. Yes. And I think this is something that I'm seeing a lot from my clients in particular when it comes to things like home working, flexible working. These were all foreign concepts in many ways. You know, we'd always talked about it, but in so many businesses it's like, oh, they're having a working from home day, and there was almost this underlying, oh, they're having a bit of a skive and a lie-in. Whereas I think it would be fair to say all of us have recognised that that's just not really what home working's about. You know, it gives us much more flexibility in many ways, but it also brings with it kind of different challenges. Yeah. I apologise. My husband's just taking the dogs out. He always manages to do this when I'm in the middle of something that's being recorded.
Well, apologies. You might get the cat walking across, so you know.
That's the world of Zoom, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
But one of the things that the organisations have struggled with, and in the early days it was kind of, let's just cope with it, we'll get through it and it'll be fine, when we looked at this as a short-term to be facing, was keeping people connected. Yep. And with the advent of Teams, you know, Teams and Zoom existed, we just didn't know how to use it. Yeah. But all of a sudden you find yourself living in a computer screen. Yes. And also that's really beneficial because you get your face-to-face communication, you can see people. It's also really draining for people. Yes. So there's been this whole moment where the business world, the corporate world, has had to pause and say, actually, what does working from home or working remotely or hybrid working, blended working, all these amazing new terms that are coming out, what does that actually mean for our people? What does flexibility mean in practice? Yeah. And every business is a little bit different in terms of what that looks like. Some corporate organisations have been great at it for years. Others they've had their hands forced a little bit, and then people have been like, well, I actually want to keep some of this because it's better. Yes. But there's definitely been this shift within the corporate world of, if we put our people first, then they're going to stay to start with. You know, there's a retention element to this. If we can attract the best talent because we look after our people, they're going to perform better. Yep. And if we give people a bit of trust, a bit of autonomy over how they work and when they work, chances are they're going to be more productive. Yep. And the amount of research that supports this is unbelievable. You might know Scotland's about to start trialling a 4-day working week. This was just
I'm moving
just
to
announced
Scotland
last week. Not really sure what the logistics of this are yet. I think it's currently at quite a high level, but organisations...
But they do that in Scandinavia.
Yeah.
And various other countries, they're trying that. And things like the 6-hour day. I think it's Sweden that does the 6-hour day, or not all of Sweden, but a lot of Sweden. And they get more work done in the 6 hours than they did previously in the 7 hours. And they have less absenteeism because people are happier.
And people are more productive as a result. And you don't suddenly have to take a day off to go to the doctors. You know, it just gives you that bit more flexibility. Yeah. One of the other things that I've found from particularly myself, actually, it's quite a personal example. I'm a morning person. You know, I don't always roll out of my bed going, woohoo, let's go. But if I've got stuff that needs done, then like for me, between about 5 in the morning and about 8 in the morning is the best time for me to do that.
Definitely.
I've got 2 young children and a husband and multiple dogs and all sorts of commitments. It's the only time my house is quiet.
Yes.
Whereas, so I could work from 5 till 8 in the morning, be finished just after lunchtime and be able to spend the afternoon picking the kids up from school.
Yep. I know. You know, it's great. It's brilliant. Yeah. But I think that's one of the most important things. If you can change to suit your body rhythm, and if the boss is okay with that and lets you do that, it changes everything. Yeah. Because for me, if someone tries to get me to work in the evening, I mean, forget it. I'm, the worst of the zombies. Get me up at, 4:30 is a bit too early, but as you say, 5 o'clock, 5:30. Yep, absolutely fine. And I get far more done.
There used to be a running joke in our office when we used such a thing. We do actually still have an office, which some of our team choose to use. But it used to be one of my colleagues would always just like take the mick out of me because come 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm useless.
Yeah.
I think if I'm delivering training, then it's different. But if I'm trying to do like busy work,
it's like
working.
Dead.
Whereas this time of night, like sort of 6 o'clock in the evening, I kind of come back to life a little bit. So it just like that flexible approach, and so many organisations are wrestling just now with, right, what does this look like moving forward? Because not everybody's happy working from home.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that because I've worked from home for years. But in fact, I started working from home when my kids were born. Well, when I got pregnant, instead of deciding to stay with the company, I decided to hand in my notice because I didn't want a boss who was going to be telling me, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. If I wanted to leave early for the kids, I was going to leave early. So I started my own business then, and I started working from home then. I think it's amazing. Yeah. It's just so much freedom. But a lot of my clients, they're really struggling with it. And I just couldn't, it took me a long time to understand the concept that someone wouldn't want to work from home because it's paradise.
Yeah, I know.
For me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting how much people really I think I'm the same. I've loved working from home. I've spent the last 11 years on the road, traveling all over the place and sort of going, it'd be lovely if my clients came to me, but that's not the reality. And then overnight, my commute's 16 seconds from the kitchen to my summer house where I live these days for work. But even within our own team, like they wouldn't mind me sharing, there's differing thoughts on this. We've got some members of our team that really are craving the social connection of being in the office.
Yeah.
Lots of clients that I've worked with, like they're facing these challenges of if 2/3 of my staff want to work from home and 1/3 don't, where's the happy medium?
Yeah.
And I think some of it comes back to your experience during lockdown.
Yes.
Now there's obviously been the whole backdrop of the pandemic. There's been a huge amount of loss and a huge amount of isolation. Yeah. And if you look at how we actually process trauma generally, and this has been a global trauma that we've experienced, we usually think of trauma as like related to a specific event or something that's happened on an individual basis. But this has been a global trauma, but individuals have experienced it very, very differently.
Yeah.
And often you'll find with a very negative experience, people don't enjoy what's happening or have really struggled with their mental health or have felt incredibly isolated. Then what they often are looking for is a return to what was. Now, whether what was good or not beforehand, it was comfortable. And
exactly.
it was,
yeah.
Whereas if people have had a really positive experience, they're like, well, why would we go back to what was before? That was a nightmare. Everything was wrong. This was wrong. That was wrong. And it's quite a normal protective instinct. It's quite an innate instinct to try and protect yourself if you've had a poor experience, to seek out comfort. So I think the words new normal have been like thrown around.
I hate that word.
I hate it. Absolutely hate this expression. But what does it even mean? Like what is it? Whereas I think some people hear it and go, oh, that's what it was before. But what was before, I think, is gone.
Yes. Yeah. I'm very glad too, personally. So, but with you saying people experience everything differently, I know you also help people build resilience and to work on their signature strengths. So what approaches, particularly ones that are well-being focused, what approaches could they use to help them, with this situation of the new normal and their experience? How can they get onto it in a better way?
So I think this is about understanding what resilience really is. Resilience is a really great buzzword. It's been around for years, and every time it starts to fade, it reappears with a vengeance. And like bouncing back or bouncing forward or resilient responses are very, I hear them a lot from corporate clients. Like, we want to build resilience in our teams. I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? What do you actually think resilience looks like? And 18 months into a global pandemic where we've experienced the biggest changes to working life that we have probably experienced since the Industrial Revolution. What actually is resilience? And quite often when you ask somebody what resilience is, they really struggle to answer that question. And if you look at this from a scientific point of view, my parents are chemists, so they'll probably tell me off for getting this wrong in terms of this definition. But it's about being able to bounce back into a particular shape or a particular form. When we look at this from an emotional level, resilience is really about mental strength. It's about self-care. It's about being able to handle all of the things that are expected of us on a day-to-day level. And if you think of resilience almost like, this is a very strange example I'm going to use here. We interviewed somebody for a job with us recently, and it's absolutely outstanding. He's starting with us soon, and I'm going to credit him because this example of resilience came from him. So a guy called Andrew Howie, who will be joining us very shortly at Tree of Knowledge. He made the comparison of resilience as being like the game Sonic the Hedgehog. Okay? So you're looking at me like I've gone a little bit crazy here, but bear with me. If you know the game Sonic the Hedgehog, then it's the little blue hedgehog that runs through all these worlds. And as he's going through it, lots of things jump out and try and kill him, or you can fall down holes, and then he has to basically fight the bad guy at the end of the world. But all the way along he's collecting coins. And the more, or I think they're rings actually, I better get the terminology right before the gamers come after me. But he's collecting all these rings all the way along. And if he gets hit by something, he loses some of his rings. But if he's got hundreds of rings, then it doesn't matter. Some of them bounce away and he can collect them, and he's got enough energy and resilience in this case to keep on going. But if he gets hit again and again and again and loses more and more and more rings, then he becomes weaker and weaker. And if we think about ourselves like this, if we're feeling resilient, which basically means we're feeling well rested, we feel mentally strong, we feel able to deal with the challenges that are coming our way, we feel like we can maybe address problems head on rather than hide away from them, we're managing our stress levels well, then we're probably more able to deal with little hiccups that come along. If, however, we've hit lots and lots of little hiccups, that level of resilience can start to deteriorate. And then all of a sudden something that to somebody else whose resilience levels are high, they've got loads of rings stuffed in their pockets, to them it doesn't seem like a big deal, it's just a little bump in the road. But to somebody who's already had hit after hit after hit, they don't have the strength. And I mean that like in almost a physical sense, because often when your resilience is low, it's physically draining. We talk about mental well-being and mental health, but they have physical effects on us. When we experience stress, it can be in our head, in our heart, in our guts.
Yeah.
When our resilience is low, it can manifest as exhaustion. It can manifest as being really short-tempered. My husband has a bad habit of, when my resilience is low, of calling me a bit nippy, which is a really good way to get a big stress response from me. But when we look at building resilience, I think people want there to be a magic potion for this, but it's actually really basic. Building resilience comes down to eating well, sleeping well, physically exercising, and building your self-awareness.
Exactly. Well, all the physical side is what I tell everybody all the time. And they're like, oh, no, that's got nothing to do with corporate and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, right. So, yeah. I think, it makes such a difference. Sleep as well. I mean, you mentioned that, but if I don't sleep, forget it. And I know, don't you find so many people, they use not having the time to sleep like a badge of honor, that it means they're super important or super productive, and it's just not true.
No, you can't function at your best when you're tired. You just have to look at studies of newborn mums in terms of their well-being. In fact, when I did my master's, I, for some unknown reason, started this at the exact same time as I had my first child.
Clever.
Seemed like a good idea at the time. But one of the studies that we had to do was a personal project. So we had to take some sort of positive psychology theory and apply it to ourselves. And I thought, I'll probably be quite a good case study for this, because I looked at my mental well-being over the first 6 months of my daughter's life.
It's a good idea. Yeah.
So there's obviously a lot of knowledge about things like postnatal depression. You've got health visitors checking on you regularly. There's lots of different questionnaires. But I was really interested in kind of two things. One was my subjective well-being, which was how I actually felt day to day. And one was the level of meaning that I had in my life, which is another facet of happiness. Like that meaningful, it's known as eudaimonic happiness, whereas our pleasure-seeking happiness, our need for stuff in order to feel happy, like retail therapy type happiness, is more hedonic. And I measured this over a few months, and it was really interesting because before I had my daughter, my level of subjective well-being was really high. Just after I had her, it was really high. And then for the following few months, it plummeted because I was exhausted. Because I had a little baby who was a little bit premature, who vomited all of the time. She was actually quite a good sleeper, but she was like a projectile vomiter. She would vomit in her sleep. It was unbelievable. So for like 6 months of my life, I just didn't sleep. So my subjective well-being absolutely plummeted. My meaning in life scale skyrocketed. It went from a pretty good place to start with to higher and higher and higher. So a lot of this is actually looking at, well, why did the subjective bit fall? And it was exhaustion. But burnout doesn't just happen to parents. Burnout in the world, like the corporate world, is unbelievably real. And you use the word badge of honor there. It's absolute nonsense that working yourself into the ground is a good thing. Like, who are we trying to impress?
I know. It's
baffled me.
But it's interesting when you mentioning about being physically fit and everything like that. Because I'm very much into corporate wellness, I'm really interested in that. And I remember from when I was young and started work, and we worked much shorter days, and it was really very, very different. And we were quite active as well. And I'm big into yoga and any kind of fitness and walking and things like that. And I've always programmed half-hour breaks throughout the day and an hour and a half at lunch to walk the dog, basically. But what I've noticed is it means I come back to my clients fresher, and I've got more energy and it lasts longer. So what I think, and what I'd be really interested to know what you think about it, is, do you think that more physical wellness, so really physical wellness, should be incorporated into the workplace? And what benefits would that have on the mental positivity at work and in general, in addition to reducing the physical problems, because we get physical problems, because we're like that all day, or we're like that, or whatever. So obviously more physical activity is going to help the physical problems. But what really interests me is the mental positivity and productivity, just because of the fact that you're moving around. So what's your expert view on that?
So the thing with physical well-being that people often forget is, and it sounds really counterintuitive, being physically active gives you more energy. Like you think, like my husband is a runner, he's an ultramarathon runner, so he takes running to the extreme. I'm a former gymnast myself, and competed at an elite level, but even just a walk, a short run, a bit of stretching, like it gives you energy because of the hormone releases that we get. We hear about the runner's high and the endorphins that are released. They have positive effects on us. They make us feel better. Mix in a little bit of oxytocin into there as well. That's it's known as the hugging or the happy hormone. Then all of a sudden everything lifts like that. But if you think about the way that our brain functions as humans, if we look at evolution, we weren't really designed to sit still at a laptop all day, every day. It's an unnatural position to be in. Like, you just have to look at the research in terms of what being sedentary means in terms of that. And things like that, you're actually going perfectly the right way about this. If you've got some breaks scheduled in for walks, I've got dogs as well myself, so I try and schedule my day so I can get the dogs out at lunchtime to get some fresh air. And I find, see, if I don't have time for that because I've got back-to-back sessions or I've squeezed a meeting in with somebody, then it's actually really detrimental to, particularly, I said earlier on, I'm a morning person, but if I've got an afternoon session, I actually need that walk to free up a bit of mental space. There's also, because of the pandemic, we obviously spend lots of time face-to-face on video calls now. And there's a level of anxiety comes along with that for many people. I think a lot of us have gotten over it in the last 18 months. At the beginning I was like, oh, there's my face. Oh, what's happened? Why is my hair all over here? Why is my face so giant? Oh, it's flipped round. Sometimes the
mirror thing.
Around. Why do I look so strange? Is this how the rest of the world sees me? All of that has actually contributed to things like our baseline level of anxiety. It's why things like Zoom now has a hide self-view button, so that you don't actually have that additional anxiety of looking at yourself. It's in your video settings.
Oh, really?
So other people can see you, but you can't see yourself.
Oh, right. Oh, God.
And it just takes away that level of anxiety. But I think something that we forgot when video calls became the norm is that we have these things called phones. We've spent a good 10 years of our lives fairly addicted to our phones, but it's like we forgot that we can pick those up and walk around and talk to people at the same time. So one really simple thing that organisations can do to increase physical well-being without necessarily detracting from working hours and things like that is look at a meeting, something like a Teams meeting. Everything is just a default Teams meeting these days. Sometimes people go on, this Teams meeting could have been an email, But actually things often do need a conversation around it. But if it's between you and one other person, you can schedule that as a walk and talk. You actually phone the other person, say, right, let's both go for a walk and discuss this thing. And if you look at brain activation when we're walking, areas of our brain that are associated with creativity, with problem solving, are actually activated as a result of the physical exercise. So you increase productivity. You also get people up and help them straighten out their backs and their postures and let them stretch off a little bit. And as a result of being physical and moving around a bit, you get that sort of psychological well-being payoff as a result. There's also, if you go into classical psychology here for a little while, when we look at how long humans can actually focus on anything, the average length of focus for most people is between 25 minutes and 45 minutes. Some people can push that up to an hour, some people can't. But if you know how long you can actually focus on something before your mind starts to wander, then you quite simply schedule a meeting for that length of time and then give yourself a break.
It's good. Also, I know they've got apps nowadays because I'm very interested in actually working with a company that does it, where they do a 3-minute break morning and afternoon, and they call it smart break, which is obviously a good name. It's the smart way to have a break. And they do exercises. You can either do it in a group, or you get up from your desk and you do like a minute of upper body, a minute of lower body, a minute of cardio. And it's just giving you a bit of movement, a bit of breaking from focusing on something, and as well as physically feeling better, because you're stretching out all of your back and your neck and God knows what, you're also taking your brain away and giving your brain a rest. And I think things like that, and walking meetings, exactly what you say with the telephone, but even people when they normally go into the conference room for a meeting, if there's only 2 or 3 people, go out, walk around the block, because it's better. It's also good for your memory, because you can't be tapping down notes. You actually have to remember what somebody said, which I think is great. I love anything like that.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's just, like, if you look at the research, I'm very much driven by, if we're ever going to implement something, there has to be research to support it. And if you just look at the benefits in the literature of how this actually impacts it, it's there in black and white. There's a legitimate research-based validated study for these types of interventions, both from a physical and a mental point of view.
No, I think it's great. I think corporate needs to do a lot more, or be a lot more aware of it. So what do they normally do? I mean, if corporate wants to help personal motivation and mindset, because you work a lot in this field, so obviously you're talking with them, you see what happens. What do they do at the moment, and what else could they do to have a really significant improvement and to really maximize the whole vision of holistic leadership, as well as just wellness and better mental environment?
So this is quite business dependent, I suppose. So there's some big corporates that I work with who have the most phenomenal wellbeing plans in place. And actually, one of the benefits of being a big corporate is you probably have the resources to be able to implement a lot of wellbeing related initiatives. So you see things like your lunchtime yoga clubs, you see your walking clubs, you see your wellbeing committees where people are putting on events, whether it's looking at stress, whether it's looking at sleep, whether it's looking at some of your more physical health, whether it's stopping smoking, that sort of thing. Lots of these things happen already. From a motivation point of view, obviously one of the big motivators that corporate use are incentives. So hit that target, get this bonus, which work to some extent. So if you look at the work of the likes of Dan Pink, he's got a brilliant book called Drive that's got a kind of shortened video that goes along with it by the RSA Animate people who draw at the same time.
Oh yes, I've seen that.
They're brilliant. It's such a brilliant way to learn as well, because it just gets into your brain differently. But one of the things he reviews in this is actually the power of incentives. Do they actually work or not? And what the research suggests, and this is research that's done by professors at Carnegie Mellon University, it's done by the Federal Bank in America, these are people who have a vested interest in do these bonuses work or not. What they found was that if you have something that really doesn't require any cognitive engagement, then incentives work really well. But if you are incentivizing somebody and it does require a bit of cognitive engagement, and they can actually have the negative or the opposite effect. They can actually reduce success. And some of this comes down to fear, what if I don't do it right? What if I get it wrong? And therefore you become a bit more risk averse. And this has been replicated across different countries, so this is not just a Western problem. This has been replicated in sub-Saharan Africa. It's been replicated in India. It really stands up across lots of different cultures. And what they looked at instead was, well, once you take the basic financial needs that people have, because we have financial needs, whether it's paying a mortgage, paying bills, the ridiculous amount I shell out a month for pony riding lessons and guitar lessons and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So once you actually aren't necessarily worrying about making ends meet, then incentives stop motivating people. They're still nice and people like them and they want the bonus so they can go on the extra holiday or buy the fancy thing that they want. But it really comes down to three things when it comes to motivating. It comes down to autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
Yeah.
And autonomy is just the fact that we like to feel a level of control in what we're doing.
Yep.
So if we have managers and leaders who are effective delegators but also have skilled people and have invested time in upskilling their people so they have all of the tools, both from a hard skill set in terms of the functional tools they need to be able to do their job, but also in that soft skill set of being able to work effectively with their teams, listen effectively, ask for help when they need it, then that's when you're more likely to get effective autonomy. Ineffective autonomy is when you say to people, there you go, crack on, get on with it. And it all goes belly up very, very quickly because there's no boundaries, there's no monitoring, there's none of that. So from a corporate point of view, when it comes to granting autonomy to your staff, it's a fantastic motivator.
Yeah.
But you need skilled leaders who know their team and who make time for their team to be able to check in and support. It's not just dumping stuff on somebody else.
Yeah.
The second facet of that was mastery. So this is just our drive as humans to get better at stuff. Like getting better at stuff is really satisfying.
Yeah.
And if we, like normally when you find people becoming bored or apathetic in a job, some of that comes down to the fact that they're either too skilled for the role and it's not challenging enough, or they've just lost the love a little bit. You know, the passion has gone a little bit.
Yeah.
Or they feel like things have changed too quickly and they've not been able to keep up.
Yeah.
Whereas our basic need or desire to get better at stuff starts when we're tiny.
Yes.
And if we have a culture in organisations where you have really effective learning and development programs, and that can be learning and development that people are just interested in. It doesn't always even need to apply directly to their role, but just the opportunity to learn things or supporting people in extracurricular learning that will benefit them because it will improve their well-being and their levels of satisfaction, which in turn builds their resilience, which in turn makes them more motivated. So quite often I see organisations saying, oh, I can't justify that training spend for that person. And I look at it going, say they're asking you to spend a couple of £1,000 on a course that has nothing to do with their job, but they're going to enjoy it and get something out of it. And you say no. That is much more damaging. Obviously we're going to have financial issues and all of that, right? But if you're in that ideal world where you have the budget, but you say no because it's not directly related to the role, then you're cutting your nose off to spite your face. You're basically saying, I don't value you enough to invest in you as a person. And that's where we need managers who treat their staff as people. Who recognise that sometimes we have a sick child at home and we're not as productive that day, but you can bet your bottom dollar that the next day that person is going to make up the work. Or if you don't recognise that people need a bit of flexibility, or that somebody is struggling, or that you've given them an unrealistic workload, then you're actually damaging that relationship. The third facet of this is purpose and meaning. If you have an organisation where people care about what you do, then you are much, much more likely to get people wanting to work for you. One of the challenges corporates often face is, we just make money for shareholders. That's I work my butt off all day, every day, go above and beyond, get no recognition, and somebody else reaps the benefit. Whereas if you look at organisations that have purpose motives, then they tend to attract the best staff. And often your purpose motive can trump what you actually do as a business. So you look at organisations, I know they've hit the press for the wrong reasons recently, but the likes of Brewdog, they have sustainability at the heart of what they do. And if you look at their packaging, yes, they make beer, but they actually are all about making the world more sustainable. They produce things in a carbon negative way. They plant forests. Even as things hit the press about problems with their culture, they were very quick to address it. I'm not going to pretend to know the ins and outs and say that it's all perfect and rosy.
Yeah.
But you look at a brand like that who've responded well to something.
Yes, makes a difference.
Particularly like negative feedback, and have a really strong purpose motive, and they become an attractive place to work.
Yeah.
Innocent smoothies. You know, I don't know how much you know about innocent smoothies. If you do not follow innocent smoothies on social media, you absolutely should. They are fantastic.
Oh,
like
really?
they make crushed fruit in a bottle, right? And they do a thing with woolly hats every year. That's what people see. But if you follow like their marketing, it is all purpose driven. You know, they've become a B Corp recently. They're funny, they're witty, they have a personality as an organisation.
Yeah.
They treat people fairly, like you can see it in their job descriptions in terms of how they recruit. People are at the heart of what they do.
I shall have to investigate.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. They're brilliant. There was another one, I can't remember their name. I deliver a business program, and I cannot for the life of me remember this business, which is awful. But they're a London-based business that are really focused on getting refugees into work, and they do this through tea. So through chai tea. So prior to the pandemic, they had like tea stalls in airports and in big hotels and that kind of thing. And when the pandemic hit, all of these big venues shut. Yep. So instead of just saying, oh, well, we can't do this anymore, they took the same refugees that they were working with, who usually do a 3 to 6 month placement with them, and then move on to like an aligned workplace who they work with. But what they then did was say, well, the market has changed. Yeah. How we get things to them has changed. So we need to change our kind of day-to-day business. But our sole purpose of getting refugees into employment is still what we do. They had to switch to like an online retail model. So looking at purpose, it can actually really guide how a business makes its decisions. Yeah. So at Tree of Knowledge, our purpose is to inspire the world, which sounds big, and there's only 7 of us, and it can be a bit scary sometimes, and we know that it's fairly, like, it's a big goal, you know, it's not going to happen overnight, it might not ever happen, but it's something for us to get up to, and we believe in it.
But yeah, you feel it, you really want to make a difference, and that makes a difference for you. It gives you a reason to get up, it gives you a reason to keep going when things are difficult. It makes you feel happy and satisfied and rewarded when somebody understands and becomes inspired. So it's the little steps that really lead to the big waves. So,
and what you said there was, I think, I can't remember exactly what you said, but it was like it keeps you focused when things are tough.
Yes.
You know, and that right there, that's resilience.
Yeah.
You know, your purpose as an organisation, your values should not just be things that are plastered on the wall for people to see when you walk in. They should be things that are lived and breathed by your people. They should be right through your appraisal processes or your personal development plans that you have for people. And they should guide behaviour. Yeah. Because yes, people, when they're little, like my son right now, he wants to be an astronaut, you know. My daughter wants to be a horse whisperer, trainer, I have no idea. A horse trainer. Yeah. And when you're little, you have these ideas of, this is what I want my job to be. You know, I think I wanted to be a physiotherapist at one point and an artist at another. Yeah. But when you're 5 years old, you don't think, oh, I wonder what my colleagues will be like. I wonder if there'll be a good reward structure. I wonder this, I wonder that. But as adults, that has a huge impact on how we feel in the workplace. Yeah, exactly. And it comes down to leadership, and it comes down to skilled management. Yep. Not people who have been promoted into posts because they're functionally very good at their job. Yes. I mean people who actually understand people.
They've got heart and empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. That's really, really very helpful. And there's so many things that people just don't think about. You know, they're not aware of. So thank you for all of that. And I have one last question. Do you have any last piece of advice that you want to give to our listeners? I always ask that at the end because it's so valuable.
So I thought about this one a lot because it's one of these questions that I get asked quite frequently. And I'm always like, oh, what's good advice? What's that look like? What does that even mean? And I think some of it comes down to battling a misconception about positive mental well-being. I think when people hear I'm a positive psychologist, they must be like, oh God, she must be happy all of the time. And that's That's unachievable.
Yeah.
Like none of us are happy all of the time. And I think my best bit of advice is when you're feeling a bit rubbish, when you're feeling a bit down, that's okay. You know, we always look for, how do I make myself better? How do I make myself more resilient? Sometimes it's really important for us to just sit in our emotions for a little while, not to dwell and not to get stuck. But if I am feeling anxious about something, you know, I can say, oh, I want this anxiety to go away. Or I can go, I'm feeling anxious right now. Why am I feeling anxious?
Yeah.
Is this legitimate anxiety? Like, have I actually done something that I should be feeling anxious about, or not done something that I should feel anxious about? Or am I overthinking?
Yeah.
And if I'm overthinking, then I go into a completely different mode to if I've actually done something. So if I'm overthinking, I go into a mode of, will this matter tomorrow? Will this matter next week? Will this matter next year? No, okay, fine. The anxiety will pass quite quickly. Yeah. If it's the other side, then it's okay. You feel anxious because, and you finish the sentence. Yeah. What can I do about it? Is it something that actually I need to feel a bit anxious or a bit guilty or a bit like lick my wounds about for a few days and sit in it and let it pass? Or is there actually an action that I can take? And if we try and rush our way through our more negative emotions, then you don't fully experience the flip side of that. You know, if we don't feel sadness or disappointment, then you don't really value joy and excitement and happiness. Yeah. So I think from the world of positive psychology, it's about valuing all of the emotions that we feel, knowing when we need help. You know, like knowing that, oh, I've actually been feeling really crap for a few weeks now. I should probably do something about this, or talk to somebody, or speak to a GP. But if it's acute rather than chronic, saying, why do I feel this way? Let yourself sit in it, feel it for a little while, and then when you come out the other side, actually really appreciate what normal feels like, or what great feels like, or what wonderful feels like.
Yeah. Thank you. That is very good. But really, it can make such a difference because you can just move on, you know, and you can enjoy what's afterwards. So anyway, I won't try and say anything because I'm not the expert, but I know what you mean, and it's really good advice. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you for joining us. Thank you for all of that. There's so much that I've learned from that, and it's so interesting, the vision of corporate and what they can do and how they can be more holistic and how we can really be involved in that and make our own choices to make everything easier. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope you come back again another time soon. So
love to.
Lovely. Thank you, Alice. We've been talking to Alice Beveridge. We've been listening on, well, you are listening on Beyond the Bottom Line. Thank you all very much for joining us, and I hope you come back again soon. And can I just apologize for the flickering on my computer screen, which is driving me mad, and I'm sure all of you. I don't know what it is, but anyway, apologies for the distraction. Have a lovely time and see you all again soon. Okay, bye.